thank you, Martin. You've done some of my work for me because I was going to introduce the panels. That saved a whole paragraph. Now we're running late, so that's good news. You've also pointed out that I was a judge before in 1997. And that year I used my introduction was to say this has been a record year for Boardman Tasker entries. There's nothing wrong, I find, as a writer with using good intros again. It's called recycling, so I'm going to say it again. This has been a record year for Boardman Tasker entries. In 1997 there were 25. This year, as Martin's pointed out, there were 38, which passes last year's record of 35. And the Boardman Tasker trustees are also rather proud of the fact that entries are coming from 8 different countries. As a preliminary remark, I just want to say that it's great that this new record says something very positive about the state of mountaineering, writing and publishing. It's heartening that interest in mountaineering, the outdoors and the wild is so high, especially at a time when we need to be vigilant in protecting the environment and asserting its values when they're under intensifying danger, not least in the potentially disastrous policy reversals emanating from the United States. I hope we can see the strength of mountaineering writing as a countervailing force for good in the face of these threats. My next paragraph is going to begin, so who are your judges? You now know, but I will add that we're an unusual trio, perhaps in that none of us are frontline climbers or mountaineers. Our qualifying attributes are as writers. We've all written mountaineering books, have entered for the award before, and so have seen the awards from both sides now. We reckon we understand the travails that writers go through as they exercise their craft. This made us especially sympathetic to many of the entries, particularly so as we wrestled with some of our shortlist decisions, feeling for those who we eventually did not select. I have to add, at times we were dismayed at the poor quality of some of the writing. I recall there's a lovely moment in Julius Caesar when the rampaging mob happens upon a suspected conspirator called Cinna and threatens to kill him. He protests he is not Cinna the conspirator, but Cinna the poet. So the mob cries, kill him for his bad verses. And they do just that. However tempted we might have been, our resort when confronting the equivalent of bad verses was to place the offending volume in the reject pile. Let us refresh our memories of the judgment criteria, namely that the award is to the best literary work concerned with the mountain environment. A lot depends on what you take literary to mean. If you Google the word, you find a range of definitions, allowing to select whichever you prefer. In some years, I feel it can be deduced that the judges preferred entries tending towards the poetic. Our own interpretation was more central to the definition, as we found we agreed on writing with the following virtues: strong, clear and precise, sentences and paragraphs with a narrative flow, good selected detail, and a strong sense of story, all qualities that should apply to fiction and non-fiction equally. We were drawn to inventive language too, provided that it fitted the other criteria and was not narcissistic or distracting. I want to add that we didn't settle on this definition at the start. We didn't have a discussion about this criteria, but as we began to narrow down the entries, we found it applied to the books we liked most. We also bore in mind that those qualities were exactly those which distinguished the writing of Joe Tasker and Pete Boardman, whose legacy we're celebrating here today. There is also a rider which states that the rules are deliberately not too precise to encourage a wide range of books. There's another that gives the judges the freedom to follow their own instincts as well as to use common sense. We did find that we were indeed judging with a mix of instincts and common sense, but also making technical appraisals of what we were reading. You should bear in mind that all three of us are or have been teachers, tutors, or trainers in English literature and language, and at times our discussions went beyond the technical into the arcane. However, I'll give an example in a short while. However, our instincts as per the criteria proved equally important. What I've learned to do is to trust my instinctive response to any work of art, music, painting, writing, and then to find the language to identify or describe my response. So we're getting to the shortlist, but first I'd like to mention several other entries that we liked, which did not make the final cut. One is the extraordinary volume, The Climbers by Jim Harrington. It's an outstanding collection of photographs of some of the most celebrated figures in mountaineering, such as Fred Beckey, Ricardo Cassin, Kurt Dienberger, Reinhold Messner, and Royal Robbins. It has rightly received critical acclaim. It were unable to include it because it's principally a book of illustrations rather than a literary work, however defined. The trustees are aware that both this year and earlier some very fine illustrated books have been excluded, but they are clear they wish to maintain the current criteria for the award. We also consider The Last Wilderness by Neil Ansell an enticing account of repeated visits to the rough bounds of Loch Harbour, the wilderness area of northwest Scotland that all three of the judges themselves know and love. Hill is a bird lover, and his description of sustaining his interest while contending with hearing loss resonated with two of us who have the same problem. The book certainly met our definition of literary, but as we debated our final shortlist, felt it did not quite meet the award criteria, since it is concerned principally with foreshore rather than mountain. The third we wish to mention is Alan Steck's A Climber's Life. This had the qualities for us of being an honest and straightforward account of an accomplished climber's life, devoid of ego and self-regard. It was in the running for some time, but was supplanted by some late entries that we eventually preferred. I have two more commendations. The first is the publisher, who has 3 entries in the final 7, namely Vertebrate. That is impressive enough in itself, but we were delighted to see how it sets the highest standards in copy editing and proofreading, and does so at a time when these attributes are so often neglected. We were astonished and appalled at the errors we found in some of the books. There was one which committed the most notorious spelling mistake in British mountaineering in its very first sentence. Name is spelling Bonington with a double N, B-O-N-N. It committed the mistake at least 6 times, but then managed to spell the name correctly another 6 times. There are numerous other spelling mistakes as well. In welcome contrast, Vertebrate is clearly determined to ensure that its books are a credit to their authors and themselves. There's John Barton here. John Barton. No?
Yes,
Stand up, please. Managing Director of Vertebrate. I'd also like to offer a tribute to the unsung heroes of the BT Awards who unfailingly keep the show on the road behind the scenes, not least in ensuring that all 38 entries reach the judges and handling the succession of queries for the aforesaid judges. They plan this occasion too, coordinating the writers, the interviews, the judges, reserving the seats, sweeping the floor, cleaning the loose. Now I made the last 2 up. I can see Steve and Janet Dean over there would like their enormous hard work and enthusiasm to be acknowledged too. Where are they? Now finally to the shortlist, which I will describe in alphabetical order of the authors. The first is Ties by Nick Bullock. This is Nick's second book. His first, Echoes, was shortlisted for the award in 2013. So you can hear them now. I'm just getting over a cold, so just bear with me. As Nick related there, he worked as a prison officer for 15 years before pursuing a life as full-time climber and writer. He climbs at the sharpest end, setting up breathtaking new routes in Scotland and the Alps, and taking part in more than 20 expeditions to the Greater Ranges. He thus offers us a scary window on the world of the extreme climber, its risks and its rewards. He takes risk in his writing too, as radical at times as his climbing. He weaves his climbing narrative with an affecting account of his family relationships, but otherwise this is an unflinching account of an obsession that may also be an addiction, and one that compels him to contend with the conflicts this produces. We did feel that occasionally Nick's writing was straining for effect and not all his radical tricks came off. They came together best in his chapters about his ascents to the Slovak direct route on Denali and the north face of Mount Alberta, which are perfectly described and paced, sustaining tension to the point where the reader subsides with relief when Nick and his partner succeed and survive. Next is The 8 Mountains by Paolo Cognetti, an Italian writer and documentary maker for whom this is his first novel. It proved immensely successful in Italy and has won several literary prizes. The book tells of a lonely city boy who spends his summer in the Dolomites, where he forms a relationship with a young cowherd. We follow them as they discover the high lakes and peaks of the Dolomites, and along the way the author explores the nature of a friendship forged and savoured in the wild. We considered it sensitive and perceptive. We enjoyed his evocation of the mountain environment and the pull it exerts, the rhythms of hill walking, the glimpse at a distant climbers, the moods of the lake, the gurgle of water unseen beneath screen. Translators sometimes feel they are left out of the reckoning, so we'd add praise for the work of Simon Carnell and Erica Sigre, of working a family partnership who live with their 2 children in a village in the Fens. We do have a caveat, which was likely to loom large in any evaluation for a mountain writing award. It concerns both the techniques and language of climbing, which at times struck us implausible or anachronistic. Whether this was an issue in the original or in the translation, we're unable to tell. There were also some discontinuities in the narrative which left us wondering if they were in the nature of radical jump cuts or a failure of editorial oversight. Those issues apart, we were moved and affected by the narrative, although we disagreed among ourselves as to whether the ending of the story was all too predictable or a genuine surprise. Next up is Kinder Scout, The People's Mountain by Ed Douglas, the writer first, we noted, and John Beattie. This is a triumphant outcome of a partnership between 2 of our very best mountain writers and photographers. Ed can be relied upon to produce a diligent and fluent account of whatever subject he turns to. His writing for climbing readership is always detailed and knowing, and when he turns to a general audience, he is clear without being patronising, an expert at conveying the nuances of climbing and mountaineering accurately and with feeling. I know that Ed has described, and I know this because he told me, I know that Ed has described writing Kinder Scout as a labour of love. I'm hoping that doesn't mean it was an act of charity. Fellow writers will know it takes intense labour to produce writing that appears as effortless as his. The love we felt was self-evident. We also know that photographs of the range and quality of John's are not chanced upon, but are the result of equal amounts of labour, patience, dedication, pre-dawn starts, post-nightfall finishes, waiting for the perfect combination of light, weather and landscape. Ed has travelled across the world in the pursuit of mountain and outdoor stories, but somehow has reserved his very best for a landscape close to home, portraying it in a full gamut of its social, political and cultural meaning, bringing new perspectives to something both familiar and yet containing secrets still to be discovered. Now to Limits of the Known by David Roberts. The author can be fairly described as a veteran of mountain and outdoor writing. His first book, The Mountain My Fear, was published in 1968. I remember reading at the time and being very impressed. Though if he's a veteran, where does that leave me, since I'm even older than he is? The book is considered to have brought the narrative techniques of fiction to mountaineering writing, in the way that Truman Capote and Norman Mailer did in their subject matters, Crime and Politics, a decade or so earlier. While producing more mountaineering writing, David broadened out to cover subjects such as the historical treatment of Native Americans. Excuse me one more time. Writing from the perspective of his mid-70s gives David Entry both a retrospective and an elegiac feel. He considers the motivations of mountaineers such as Shipton and Tillman, commemorating their individuality and idiosyncrasies in a way which underscores his own approach to the major ascents he had accomplished in a lifetime of climbing and exploring. This continues through his quest for traces of mountain-dwelling people in Utah and Mali. He shares with Ed Douglas the ability to make mountaineering accessible to the lay reader without ever distorting its values. We found his writing clear and compelling, with a rich vocabulary and arresting figurative language. It was literary in the best sense of the word, at least as we defined it, elegant and lucid rather than flattering quasi-poetic. Because some of the chapters venture outside mountaineering to polar exploration and cave diving, we did have to consider whether it met the award criteria of a central theme concerned with the mountain environment. However, mountains and mountaineering form a running thread, a leitmotif that unifies the discussion. David has the perspective of a veteran, that word again, a veteran mountaineering writer and practitioner, providing a lens through which he views other forms of adventure and exploration. There is another element to the book to deepen that perspective, namely that he guides us through a personal journey as he learns he has cancer and then receives medical treatment of a particularly painful and draining kind. Now, I didn't know that this scene was going to be shown, but I mention it here. He contemplates his mortality in an unflinching way, and the final scene is immensely poignant while leaving his survival in the balance, to be determined after the book closes. Now to our fifth book, The Flying Mountain by Christoph Ransmayr, an Austrian writer. This was first published in German in 2006. so the version we considered is an English translation. This is our second work of fiction, and a remarkable one at that. It is written entirely in verse, described by the publisher as blank verse, though the technical experts among your judges consider it more properly free verse, because the metrication is not regular. We can debate that afterwards, particularly. The translator, I can take it up with the translator as well afterwards.
The publisher's wrong.
The publisher's excellent, thank you very much. Vindication, yes! It tells how two brothers from Southwest Ireland embark on an expedition to eastern Tibet in search of a mountain that may represent the last blank spot on the map. Since the author is Austrian, this is a particularly bold act of the imagination. The shared journey prompts an examination of the brothers' relationships, its tensions and rivalry played out against the wild mountain environment. We found the verse mostly powerful and compelling, a suitable vehicle for conveying the emotions unleashed as the journey neared its goal. Christoph set himself a tough task in relating the story from a single point of view, that of one of the brothers, requiring him, we thought, to do a lot of telling rather than showing, setting a limitation that we didn't think he always overcame. We do want to mention once again the translator Simon Pear, whose achievement was all the more remarkable, given that it required him to translate German free verse into English free verse, and did so in a way which preserved and perhaps even enhanced the spirit and idiom of the original. As with the Cognetti, it has won important critical acclaim and was long listed for the Man Booker Prize. However, as with the Cognetti, we have reservations about the mountain and mountaineering descriptions which sometimes struck us as inauthentic and which as judges for a mountain writing prize we could not overlook. Next comes The Ogre by Doug Scott. We've already termed this book long awaited, and I think most of you now appreciate what we mean. I've got it's 41 years since the fall. Was it 40 or 41? Does it matter?
Now 41.
41 years since the extraordinary drama in the Karakoram when Doug broke both his legs in a fall while descending with Chris Bonington, YN, for making the first ascent of the Ogre. It thus began an epic rescue through a raging storm, which was made even harder when Chris fractured his ribs in the subsequent fall. It was largely through the extraordinary efforts of the remaining climbers, Clive Rowland and Mo Antoine, that eventually reached safety. Although Chris has given a partial account of these events, it has never been told in full before, and Doug has now done so, giving Clive and Mo the credit they have long deserved. In this he was assisted by having access to memoirs drafted by Clive and the diary of Nick Escort, another member of the expedition. The story is almost unbearably tense and painful, with true heart-in-mouth moments as it carries you through. The writing is clear and honest, so true to the character of one of our most distinguished yet approachable mountaineers that you can almost hear him speak the words. It also left you wanting more. It did occur to us that Doug could perhaps have used some more narrative tricks to extend the tension. The account of the ascent and rescue is complemented with a very expert and readable account of the history of the Ogre. Here we have to declare an interest as one of our judges, Catherine Moorhead, helped with research and information for the history section, and so she recused herself when it came to considering the book. It was without difficulty that Roger and I selected it for the shortlist. Our final choice is Honouring High Places, The Mountain Life of Junko Tebe by Helen Rolfe. I must say this is a book which surprised us all. It was promoted as the biography of the first woman to climb Everest in 1975, and we opened it, I hate to admit it, without any great expectations. We were won over by the insights it offered into Junko's life and achievements, the culture she found, the expedition she took part in, these described at times with refreshing honesty. She went on to become the first woman to climb the highest summits of the 7 continents, achieving this in 1992 when she was 53. The book was based on her own memoirs, expertly adapted by Helen Rolfe, a Canadian writer, and translated by another duo, Yumiko Hiraki and Rico Holtfeld. This is another book we like for its honest and economical writing with a strong narrative flow. This is another subject, another author had to contend with being diagnosed with cancer, related with acceptance and forbearance, despite her regrets at having so much more she had hoped to do. She died in 2016 at the age of 77, and this book is a superb testimony and celebration of her life. So there we have it. 7 strong candidates from which there can be only one winner. may have been able to detect from the subtext of our judgments those which we saw as the strongest contenders. After eliminating 4, there were 3 we placed in our group for the final judgment. One in particular regret being unable to select, not least because the author made a consistent and outstanding contribution to our writing, and his book might have won in another year. We trust that before long his time will come. However, in the end, we were clear and unanimous in our choice for all the qualities we have set out. The Boardman Tasker Award for 2018, and it's to our great regret he is not here in person to accept it, goes to the author of Limits of the Unknown, David Roberts.
Peter, many thanks for that address and the work of you and your fellow judges. Many congratulations to David Roberts on winning the 2018 Boardman Tasker Award for Mountain Literature. It is a great achievement. And I believe that somebody is here to accept the award on his behalf. Thank you, Jay. So, in here we have a certificate, and have we got a photographer?